Welcome one and all to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola, and I'm gonna lead you through your daily rundown of all of this insanity that's going on. But thankfully, we have a secret weapon today, host of Deep Dive, as well as Game Busters. Jordan Ewell returns once again. Jordan, how's it going?
John, thanks for having me. It's going well.
I caught just a little bit of cat tail in the background of that shot, very briefly. Your cat running around in the background.
She was up on the desk a second ago.
Nice. Well, we had right before we went live, I was able to see the pup. So I guess the cat wanted to make sure she got a little attention too. But anyway, welcome back to the show. It's been a little bit. What have you been up to?
John, we have been raising money on Deep Dive for the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. And
what, like $100 or like
a little
$120
bit more,
or
a little bit more,
like $300?
John, we're up to $21,000 for the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. This is led by the TYT community, and now because we set a goal of 20,000 and we hit it, Jank, Brooke Marks, Adiana Vega, and myself are going to do the Pocky One Chip Challenge next Thursday night, 8:30 Eastern on Deep Dive, twitch.tv/TYT as punishment for hitting our goal. So if you want to see Jank eat the hottest chip in the world, probably cry, sweat profusely, all of those good things, tune in. And there's still time to donate, helpyemennow.com.
That's awesome. Wait. Are you implying that the Ukraine's not the only catastrophe? No, I want to focus. Anyway, yeah, no, you're totally right. It's an amazing accomplishment that I can't even conceive of it. The chip is going to be rough. For a long time, people have been able to tune into Game Busters and bust a game. Now you're going to be able to bust all their guts, I think, with that chip, which I'm legitimate. Like I would be so scared.
It's bad.
I hear it's hot.
It is. It's miserable, and it gets hotter every year. And the most recent year I did it was, I believe, 2019, and I was in like physical pain afterward. Like my stomach was just in pain. I had to lay down for about a half an hour. It was.
One of you might die. And I'm worried that one of you might die. So anyway, this might be a snuff stream. So tune in and you can see it live on Deep Dive. But what you can see here over the course of the next, I'm gonna say 88 minutes or so, is a rundown of a whole lot of stuff. Scandals involving White House call logs. A warning for the Democrats going into the midterms. Do you realize that it's all cliff ahead of you? Maybe you should change course. We've got updates on what's going on with the cops. Spoiler alert, not good stuff. Facebook going to war with TikTok behind the scenes, sending out their spies, their assassins, and even some good news, actually. We're gonna fit in just a tiny bit of good news amidst all the insanity. So if you wouldn't mind doing us a favor and hitting the like button, sharing the stream, whatever it is, the algorithm wants on your platform would be great, because notifications are absolute garbage. But we're very glad to have you here. And if you want to send us any comments, tweets, super chats, all that, we will respond as we go. But with all that said, hold on. Armed Liberal says, Jordan, please have milk, Pepto, and water ready after everyone eats the chip.
I'm not a milk guy. I would want like an emote in Twitch, in the TYT Twitch chat, memorializing my reaction, just a thought of drinking milk. It's the grossest drink on the planet.
I love milk. What is wrong with milk?
It's so gross. Where do you want to start?
I had a friend growing up who would not drink milkshakes because he was convinced that the way you make a milkshake is with rotten milk. And he was inconsolable about that fact. I think it was like an early QAnon thing. But anyway, I feel like you're on you're being radicalized towards the milkshake position. How about this? We'll have someone ready in the wings to smear peanut butter on your tongue to coat it. Okay, we'll do that.
I like it.
Anyway, you might not when it happens. But anyway, with that said, we're gonna get into the news, starting with this.
An example, supply chain. You go to a store, they don't have bread. We're like a third world country. They don't have things. You go to buy something at Tiffany, you go to buy something at a hardware store, high, low. They don't have product. They say, even me, when I order things like for furnishings for a building or something, they say it's gonna take 9 months to get it. Used to be like same day service. Supply chain. we never even heard the term. It wasn't like the system was working. The system's totally broken. Our system is broken. And we're going into socialism and we're going into communism.
Okay, there's a lot going on there, and I hope that we can touch on all of this. It's obviously insanity. The idea that nobody knew what a supply chain was, that he hadn't heard about it until this year. He was the president for 4 years. But you can't get bread. Did you know that? You can't get bread. We reached peak toast. There's no toast anymore. And what I love is when these like disconnected, wealthy elites try to say that they're one of you can't get bread. You know, when you go to shop at Tiffany's or hardware store, you go to those, don't you, Jordan? No, we don't go to Tiffany's. I'm not buying high-class furnishings for hotels. High, low, there's no product, Jordan.
This reminded me of that Lucille Bluth clip from Arrested Development, which is how much could a banana cost, Michael? $10? And just this, he's so hilariously out of touch. And I really want to know what he tried to buy that was going to take 9 months to get there.
Yeah.
It was probably, some probably ornate piece of furniture that, was probably handmade somewhere. And just yeah, look, we're all in this situation. We all can't get our, $40,000 king's chair for our second living room. Because this is tough, guys. I feel you. But yeah, do you all? I'm sure you all remember at the onset of COVID when people were worried about what the future would look like and the hoarding that took place and how you weren't even you weren't able to get essentials like toilet paper and the price spikes that occurred for essentials like that. He was very clearly aware of it then. But they had this sort of collective amnesia in the Republican Party, acting like this is a purely unique situation only to the Biden administration and directly caused by his policies. When it's not. They knew this was happening. Scarcity was happening during COVID, during the Trump administration, but they have to politicize this.
Exactly, 100%. Yes, there are some supply chain issues. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. We are ignoring it here, but since he and his rich buddies over the past 50 years have transferred so much of our manufacturing base over to Asia, they're still trying to take it seriously. There are ripple effects of this, and it doesn't necessarily all have to do with Biden specifically. The whole thing's just insane. The idea that his custom furnishings had next day service back then. That's not how that works. Couches take a while to make. The whole thing is just insanity. Oh, by the way, we're gonna tell you why he's doing this, why he's going off about bread and stuff in just a sec. But let's also bear in mind they're doing this classic thing, which I think you've identified multiple times on Twitter, Jordan, which is he said, and we're moving into socialism and we're moving into communism. We have supply chain issues with the socialism. But we don't have socialism. We have capitalism right now. I love when there's a breakdown in capitalism and they identify that as social. The right loves showing a shot of empty store shelves that you find out was from 2016 in Croatia or whatever, but they use it as a demonstration of the issues of socialism. Now, we don't have socialism. Your system failed. It's the one that's having trouble right now. You don't get to criticize the thing that we didn't have. It's like when the power grid failed in Texas that winter and they blamed the Green New Deal. But we didn't do the Green New Deal. How can that possibly be to blame, Jordan? It's an amazing little disappearing act there.
For that, it was crony capitalism and these empty shelves. I mean, what system loves artificial scarcity more than capitalism? It gives them an opportunity to raise prices and profiteer in a moment of national distress. So, but look, they keep saying it, we're returning to socialism, we're returning to communism, buddy. I wish. This is absurd. They will, and it's another reminder that we should never capitulate to Republicans on this type of thinking. They will use it. The Democrats will use it in the primary to malign progressives. They did it to Bernie. Oh, he's a socialist. He's a communist. We can't nominate him because then the Republicans will call us socialists and communists. So they nominate Biden, and what happens? The exact same thing. No matter who you are and what you do, if you were on the left, Republicans are going to say this. So stop feeding into it by attacking progressives, but also stop acting like this is something that we really need to be mindful of. They're going to say it regardless.
Yeah, they 100% are. Now, why are they saying? Well, in general, they say it. Obviously, it's a distraction and all that. In general, it's an attack in general. But here specifically, I think it might be a specific sort of distraction, not just the bread stuff and the supply chain stuff, not just other stuff that he talked about in it. This was the conversation, by the way, where he asked for Vladimir Putin to release dirt on Hunter Biden. Putin's busy committing war crimes, dude. He needs to focus. He can't do your dirty work. But anyway, why? Well, because this week we have a lot of stuff that Trump would love for you to not focus on and for the media to move on from. And that's gonna happen inevitably, even the damage work. We're gonna eventually move on, but we're gonna try to stick with it for just a little bit. Not only the judge ruling earlier this week that he almost certainly committed felony obstruction in a criminal legal theory thing that he knew was illegal, but also the call logs. If you didn't see the show yesterday, White House call logs the National Archives turned over to the House January 6th committee have a 7-hour gap that don't include any calls that the president made or received from 11:17 a.m. to 6:54 p.m. on January 6th. Now, what's interesting about that is it would be one thing if it was just he'd had a couple Filet-O-Fish and he had a long midday nap or something, but that's not actually what happened, because we know specifically about some of the calls that happened during that time that have been suspiciously scrubbed from the official record. And I will remind you of a few. These are things that, for the most part, we've talked about as each of these has come out in terms of news. For instance, it doesn't include his final call with then Vice President Mike Pence. It might have been the last phone call at that point that Mike Pence ever had in his life, because they were trying to kill him. So that's where he was trying to pressure Pence to overturn the election certification process. That's not on this record. A call with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is also omitted. That was the conversation in which Trump, responding to the GOP leader sounding the alarm on the violence unfolding in the Capitol, infamously remarked, quote, "Well, Kevin, I guess these people are more upset about the election than you are." That is according to Representative Jamie Herrera Butler. He told them like they're justified to be angry and to be hunting the halls of Congress for your blood. That's a call that should probably be on the log. Senator Mike Lee told the Salt Lake Tribune that he got a call from Trump moments after the Capitol Police halted the Senate proceedings. According to Lee, the president had apparently misdialed and meant to reach Senator Tommy Tuberville. Tuberville told Trump that Pence was being evacuated. So he was trying to reach multiple senators. That's not in the log. There are calls that Jim Jordan has talked about. Those aren't on the log. For instance, Politico reported that Representative Matt Gaetz participated in just one of the several Jim Jordan calls to Trump. This is when they urged the president to call off his supporters as they were attacking the building. Jordan told Politico that he'd have to think about it when asked to confirm if Gaetz was present. And Gaetz himself has refused to say if he was part of the call. But the calls were definitely happening, Jordan. And these are the ones that we've gotten Republicans, sometimes openly, sometimes they've sort of stumbled into admitting that the calls were there. But that's a 7-hour period. There could have been a lot more phone calls than just these.
Right. I mean, the old cliche, if there's smoke, there's typically fire, applies here. That they went out of their way to scrub these records, that there's, spotty details, and all of a sudden I've got amnesia type behavior from members of Congress, and that the stories aren't always aligning or they're changing details, should all collectively show you that they knew what they were doing was wrong. They knew the consequences of their actions. You can infer what their motive was. In some cases, they explicitly told you, and they just decided to try to, get away with it. This is a total cover-up. And a lot of people have been drawing parallels to Nixon because there was a similar gap in some of his White House recordings during Watergate. But the difference is, like, that was when his own party turned on him, and we're just not seeing that here. So yeah, those parallels in the behavior might be apt, but the consequence will probably be different and non-existent, because his own party is going to need to be, is going to need to join Democrats in punishing and prosecuting Trump.
Oh, and I don't think we're gonna live hold our breath for that. Also, wasn't the Nixon gap like 18 minutes or something like that?
Yeah, it was something like short. It was like definitely not 7 hours.
Conversation. Yeah, this is a lot. This is 7 hours. Trump, a busy caller too, from what has already been revealed. And Jordan's 100% right. about what this represents. Now, why that is important legally is that for some reason, we've gotten to discover over the past few years tons of things that apparently are not illegal in America. Doing a coup, not necessarily illegal. If Trump thought that all the things he was doing were legitimate, not illegal, and warranted. If he was a true believer in the conspiracy theories that he was spreading, many people seem to think then maybe he didn't commit any crimes, which is its own form of madness, but let's run with it. When you scrub the records of a 7-hour period during which you either just got rid of the records or were actively using burner phones that you're pretending that you're not familiar with, but like all these people are saying you definitely knew what they were and you definitely used them, then you cannot imply that we just thought everything we were doing was totally legitimate. We honestly believe these things and we thought all this was legal. No, when you're hiding all of your communications, that is a strong signal that you knew what you were doing was illegal, was wrong. And in the end, it's probably not even gonna matter because who is actually gonna take this to legal, to a legal phase? Merrick Garland, the January 6th commission? No, probably not. But if they did, this would be a very strong piece of evidence that they knew at the time that what they were doing was illegal.
Yeah, there's no consequences for any of this type of stuff. It's deeply frustrating. We see Republicans especially try to malign other countries and especially developing countries around the world as corrupt, oligarchic, whatever, to justify a military presence, an invasion, to impose our will on countries around the world. And you look here, they just don't seem to care if someone's willing to completely overrule the will of the voters and subvert democracy for their own political gain. It's deeply frustrating, and this is very serious. It's sort of in the past, and I really worry about what it's going to look like going forward if they collectively realize there's no consequences for any of this stuff. Yeah. We can just do whatever we want. Democrats are going to do anything. Our own party isn't going to care. They'll keep voting for us. In fact, it might even mobilize voters. So what's stopping them from doing it again or just completely ignoring local or state election results? Like, it's extremely dangerous as we go forward if there's no consequences.
Exactly. Yeah, there's not a lot of learning that goes on in American politics, but we have been learning how little consequence there is for virtually anything, how few defenses there are against even the most radical moves. Well, so this is important for the gap is important for legal reasons. Also, one would think the Republicans would kind of have a problem with it. What about our emails and what about the private phone and all this stuff about communications? You're supposed to be transparent, they said for so long. Are they gonna stick with that now? What do you think? What do you think?
For part of the time, at least, Mr. Producer, wasn't Donald Trump giving a speech? So for part of the time, presumably when he's going from the White House, giving a speech, greeting people going back to the White House, it's very conceivable his phone wasn't even turned on. I'm just saying, ladies and gentlemen, nobody's had an opportunity to respond to anything, to any of this. Nobody. It's all one-sided. It's all being leaked. It's all intended to persuade you through the corrupt media.
So that is Mark Levin, who spent several years on a daily basis bursting blood vessels in his brain over Hillary Clinton potentially hiding literally anything that she did as Secretary of State. Now his job, and he's very clear about the effect that media is going to have on this in that clip, saying that it is corrupt media trying to persuade you. He's in the middle of doing that, persuading the right wingers that a 7-hour, it's basically like the Kool-Aid man has burst through the White House call logs. That's not something you should worry about. Because okay, 7 hours sounds really bad, but he was doing a speech for part of it, probably had 2 or 3 extended bathroom breaks, a couple of brief micro seizures. I mean, that's really gonna cut it down to 5 hours out of the call logs. Is that really something you should be worried about? But it's not just the numbers that he's going to be defensive about. He's going to himself identify reasons we should be concerned about this in his effort to convince us that we in fact should not, as you'll see in this clip.
The records show former White House Chief Strategist Stephen K. Bannon, who said on his January 5 podcast that all hell is going to break loose tomorrow, spoke with Trump twice on January 6th. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? That could have been any time on January 6th. So you see how the game is played? And what if the president did use his private phone? I think he was known to use his private phone. We know Obama used his private phone. We know Hillary used her private phone. We know nothing ever happened to them, whether it was Benghazi, whether it was Hillary destroying emails, whether anything of the sort.
Yeah, but you cared about that. You made a massive deal about that. There were multiple congressional hearings about all of the stuff that you're now like, so whatever. Like nobody actually cared about that stuff. And like, so he talked to Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon predicted chaos, and chaos indeed happened. That could have happened at any time. That's our point. We'd like to know the time, but they're hiding it, buddy. Jordan, this is so amateurish. Like this effort to, we know if Biden went off comms for a minute and a half, they'd be freaking out. It's 7 hours. What would it take at this point to get them to be consistent?
Yeah, the comparisons to Obama and Hillary, and do you remember the outrage over the visitor logs? They were all up in arms during the Obama years that they weren't releasing the visitor logs to the White House, and that was proof that there was shady dealings happening. And obviously, everyone remembers the Hillary email scandal, and he says, "Well, nothing happened to them, but you tried. You wanted something to happen." So it's not just that, like, okay, because there was no consequences, like there shouldn't be any here. It's that now I don't even care anymore. I don't even want the first step, which would be an investigation or hearings or anything about it. But it's not that. It's that it's their guy. And this type of hyper partisanship and the cynicism, what really gets to me is how him and others in his space, because they have wide audiences, have just brainwashed this country. And that's just what people believe. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess the call could have been at any time, and not taking a second to think like, oh no, they were probably talking about this while it happened. He probably was not shaking hands with people and being greeted back at the White House for 7 hours. Yeah. Like this is it's ludicrous. This is childlike reasoning.
Exactly, and it'll be convincing to millions of people. And we've thrown out the hypothetical like, what if Biden did? No, but like this isn't just to get them to be consistent about if Biden did it. If there was a 7-hour gap in Biden's call logs, we would be highly suspicious too, and we should be. And one of the earlier points he made, it's not fair for them to have leaked this information. No one's been able to respond to it. Well, first of all, it's been a day now, but it had been most of a day by the time he recorded that. They could respond to it. They could react to it. Also, by the way, they're the ones who scrubbed it. They pre-acted to it. They're the ones who did the thing. We're reacting to the insane scandal that they decided to launch into. The response where you cannot talk about a scandal until the people who did the crimes decide to talk about it publicly. That is not a way that he has approached any scandal ever in years and years of covering political news. So you should be highly suspicious that that's his approach now. Now, all that said, we got a lot more stuff to talk about. So we're gonna take a brief break, respond to some of your comments, and then come back with more after this.
So in the case of individual coverage, if the total cost is around $7,400 and your employer pays, say, $6,200, and then you pay for around $1,200, now that's thousands of dollars more that everyday people could be saving per year if it weren't going directly to insurance companies' private profits, correct?
Yes.
Interesting. So one of the things that we're really seeing here is that the potential to moving to a Medicare for All system could actually give people a raise in many circumstances.
That is, of course, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking there about Medicare for All during the ongoing right now House Oversight Committee hearings on Medicare for All. We wanted to make sure that we spotlighted this because there's a very good chance you might not even know that these are going on and that they are making the case once again in the House for Medicare for All. Not only AOC, but there's been some great questioning, great advocacy from, for instance, Cori Bush, She co-chaired the hearing, by the way, saying that, quote, Americans deserve a healthcare system that guarantees health and medical services to all. Congress must implement a system that prioritizes people over profits, humanity over greed, and compassion over exploitation. And I am glad that they are doing this, not only because it's an incredibly popular policy, the groundwork in terms of persuasion of the public has already been done, it's already successful. And it's not only so needed, considering how bad of a situation we were in terms of healthcare and insurance pre-pandemic, and it's hardly gotten better during that time. But also, it's evidence that despite the fact that Joe Biden seems to have been asleep for the past few months, and most of the Democrats, especially the Senate, I literally cannot tell you the last thing that they did. There are elected representatives who care about solving these problems, Jordan, and so it's good to occasionally get a reminder of that.
Right, I just remember during the primary how Bernie's conversation and platform around Medicare for all was treated as unreasonable, unrealistic, too expensive, whatever, despite every other developed nation in the world having a universal healthcare system. So Biden said, look, I'm gonna do something, but I'm gonna do a public option. That was what they hammered the entire time. I've compiled a supercut of every time he talked about a public option during the campaign. I tweeted it out a couple months ago. And as soon as he got the nomination, as soon as he got it, as soon as he won the election, he never mentioned it again. So this was never out of an actual preference for a different policy. This was just to kill this momentum because they had the support of the health insurance companies, glorified middlemen who are treated as essential services in the healthcare system. No, it's not. That's just something that makes your costs go up. That's it. That's like literally their role because they're there to profiteer. And he never mentioned it again, and we haven't heard about it since. So good job, America.
Yeah, and it wasn't what we wanted then, by the way. It was a half measure or a quarter measure or a tenth measure, and then they just moved on. And that largely is what I want to talk about now. You have some in the party, still a minority, the most important, most passionate, most energetic, portion of the entire party, but still a very small minority that actually believe that you're supposed to get elected to accomplish things, that would not only fulfill the ethical obligation you have to your representatives to make good on the promises that you've made and to actually represent them in these areas on policies that are incredibly popular, but also pragmatically, there's a lot of elections in America. There's one coming up right now, actually. They're periodic. There's the midterm elections, and the Democrats' strategy is, I don't know, sorry, I blanked for a second. I have no idea why they think someone would be like, in a good couple of years, I want more of this strategy. Only potentially by comparison to the alternative, which is apocalyptic, which we'll get to. But while they're trying to reassure people that they feel their pain when it comes to the high cost of insurance and all that, the Democrats are doing basically nothing. And there are people who are worried, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who just did an interview where she said, among other things, if the president does pursue and start to govern decisively using executive action and other tools at his disposal, I think we're in the game. But if we decide to just kind of sit back for the rest of the year and not change people's lives, yeah, I do think we're in trouble. And this is not a hypothetical. We're months and months and months into exactly that. In pursuit of not wanting to seem like you're doing too much, that you're FDR 2.0, that you're a radical or a socialist or whatever. You don't want to turn off those independents or whatever. Well, that's all BS. It's always been BS. And she identifies that, saying, we need to acknowledge that this isn't just about middle of the road, an increasingly narrow band of independent voters. This is really about the collapse of support among young people, among the Democratic base, who are feeling that they worked overtime to get this president elected and aren't necessarily being seen. Young voters is a great group to identify in that group. I would say basically every non-white, centrist liberal voting bloc as well. Jordan, what do you think about this? I feel like she's articulating a lot of the fears that we have.
Absolutely. In 2018, the biggest driver of Dem energy in the election was around healthcare, because we were on the heels of Trump's attacks on the Affordable Care Act, which could have caused millions of people to lose health insurance. People remembered that. It impacted them directly. So they showed up to vote, and it was a hugely successful narrative. And now here we are, having done nothing more to address that problem, let it language, and I think we'll get into later, it could get worse right before the election. And we just have nothing in response. The other two that are especially felt by young people are wages and housing. And what are we doing on that? Oh, sorry, and student debt. And we couldn't raise the minimum wage because Biden's strategy, which is appealing and reaching across the aisle, appealing to moderates, working in a bipartisan way to do it, failed. Manchin and Sinema killed it. And student debt, which he could do immediately whenever he wants with the stroke of a pen, and they won't do it. And then the cost of housing, we're seeing more and more people are being displaced. More and more people are seeing huge spikes in rent, and we have no solution on how to fix that. So all of these issues that impact people in a material way, there is no response from Democrats. That's something they would feel immediately. The infrastructure bill, which is their only real accomplishment, isn't going to help address those issues. And they severed it from the reconciliation bill, the Build Back Better bill, to try to get moderate support and pass infrastructure, and just took their word for it, thinking they would come back and vote for it. And they didn't. And progressives told them as it was happening, this isn't going to work. They're not gonna come back around and vote for your bill. And sure enough, here we are. So they have nothing now to run on.
Yeah, she identified it. Not as you said, as it was happening, but also in advance of it happening. That's why they did the 2-track thing in the first place. They knew that the football was gonna be pulled away. By the way, thankfully in this article in Intelligencer, they identify that she and the few progressives that voted against it were right to. The eventual bill was killed. And she identifies sort of the game that's being played in terms of courting these moderates, like trying to appeal to Manchin's sense of reason or justice or cinema or what, as if they're humans, as if they're humans that can be persuaded on these things, as if they're not just looking at the balance sheet on their donations. She said, I just felt like we called 2 different plays on this one about that strategy. I think there's a sense among more senior members of Congress that we can get back to this time of buddy and backslapping, and we'll cut a deal and go to a room with some bourbon and some smoke, and come out and work something out. I think there's a real nostalgia and a belief that that time still exists, or that we can get back to that. She goes on to say, I was never under the illusion that we can bring Manchin along. And why would you be? And honestly, we're not done with this game. We were talking last week about Manchin coming out and saying, no, I'm like totally good on like actually still doing a reconciliation bill. In fact, I want it to be focused on climate. I'm gonna give you $500 billion to deal with climate. And so you see the football being placed and being positioned, and we're supposed to run towards it with headlines like, he launches a new push for all of the above energy bill, which already sounds bad, by the way. All of the above includes a lot of absolute trash. But you should know that he also this month hired a natural gas industry lobbyist to work for the Senate's Energy and Natural Resources Committee. CJ Osmond spent nearly 6 years at the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, most recently as its literal top lobbyist. But no, I'm sure we're just like 1, maybe 2 lunches away from getting him on board in terms of doing something serious to deal with the climate. So Jordan, I want your response on that, but also what we alluded to earlier. There's a great article right now up on the Prospect by John Walker about Democrats creating effectively their own October surprise. And what this is about is previously there had been subsidies for the ACA. Those, as it stands right now, because the reconciliation bill didn't happen and the Democrats have all crawled into their coffin, they've been asleep for months. As of right now, those are going to end right before the election. People are gonna be millions of people are gonna be thrown off of their insurance coverage. Many more, millions more are gonna have skyrocketing premiums, potentially doubling right before the election. In addition to having to restart paying their student loans and losing the child tax credit, and there's no funding for COVID aid and all that stuff, and for getting rid of the rental, the eviction moratorium and all of that foreclosure moratorium. They're like setting it up perfectly, Jordan, to get absolutely walloped in this election.
I mean, at what point do we start to question, do they just want to lose? Because there are things like student debt that they could easily rectify. That freeing up $1.6 trillion in debt from millions of Americans would be life-changing. People would start to be able to buy homes. People would be able to buy cars. They'd have more discretionary income that they could spend. That is a driver of economic growth. If you're worried about an economy and a recovery, that's one way to free up a ton of middle class spending. So why won't you do that? It's because they're beholden to, private interests and corporate interests. They're getting a ton of pressure from servicers, from private companies who have a vested stake in making sure these people stay in debt. And when you are in that situation, you're more reliant on inadequate jobs because you need something to be able to pay off these bills.
Yeah.
And this story from the Prospect, I read right before we started, and it put me in such a down mood, which I know is a break from my usual mood. But this is
usually, I'd say jolly.
Yeah, totally. But this is like, how this is so obviously a bad thing. It's just we're watching the iceberg just like slowly get closer and closer, and everyone's like, it's nothing we can do. Sorry, but it's another reminder of how this strategy of appealing to moderates isn't going to work, because it was initially in Build Back Better, the reconciliation bill, and Manchin killed it. And what's in it for him? Why would he extend it? So this is awful, and I saw it could kick 3 or so million people off of insurance, and then another 14 million could effectively see their premiums on marketplace plans just double, huge spikes. This is horrific.
On top of all of the other inflation that they already know people are worried about. You know what moderates like? Health coverage. Is staying in their house. They like these sorts of things. Maybe look into it. If the Dems actually wanted to win, and that was the most important thing to them, not all of the actual stuff with their donors and becoming lobbyists after they leave office and all that, it would be comically easy for Democrats to have all political power in this country forever. We already know everything they need to do. They just don't want to do it. So anyway, we're gonna go to our break because this hour is just burning up. But when we come back, we're gonna give you an update on the situation regarding police violence nationwide. It's devastating. And also, Facebook goes to war with TikTok. We'll have that for you after this. So what you just saw is a mashup of some of the police brutality that happened during protests against police brutality back in 2020. During the protests after the killing of George Floyd across cities across America for months and months and months, people trying to desperately finally get some change, to have the approach of the police in terms of their willingness to use violence, including deadly violence, to finally change. That mashup was put together by Jordan Uhl, who's on the show. So Jordan, you had put together several of those. There is way more where that came from. That is just a tiny little bit, and it's rough to think back on how much happened, how many people were injured, permanently disfigured as a result of that, and to know, as we're gonna get into, that so little has changed in nearly 2 years now after the greatest social movement of our lifetimes. They've been so successful in stymieing the change.
Yeah, they had a ton of momentum. Polling in that moment showed that a vast majority of this country supported police reform. And that was an objectively brutal and unjustified act of police violence and murder. There was, I don't remember a single police killing that saw as much bipartisan condemnation as George Floyd's killing. You were in a moment where you could have done something. Pew did a poll and found that around 90% of Americans supported police reform in that moment. And what did Democrats do? What did Congress do? Congress did nothing. Democrats kneeled in a kente cloth. Nancy Pelosi thanked George Floyd, and then when they took power, they couldn't pass it through the Senate a moderate police reform bill, and now they've just since abandoned it. And in the State of the Union, you have Biden screaming, "Fund the police," and that gets a standing ovation from Republicans. So they've just done a total 180 because they just don't really care that much.
Exactly. Yeah, a standing ovation that then went back to nonstop criticism. It's not like he's winning them over. It's not like they're going to support the reconciliation bill or give an honest shake to his Supreme Court nominees. But anyway, it's a rough look back, and there's a lot of footage like that. But as you've been seeing in our lower third, 2 years later, the cops are still at killing on average about 3 people per day. So far this year, this is as of the 24th of March. They've killed 249 people. It's about 3 deaths per day. And it mirrors effectively the same patterns before all of those protests happened. If we jump ahead, you can see we got 249 so far. There had been over 1,100 2021, 1,100 2020, almost the exact number. Nearly 1,100 2019, 1,145 2018. Isn't it amazing that it's so consistent? That nothing seems to change. Crime patterns don't change it. Presence of a pandemic or not doesn't change it. A focus nationally and socially on police brutality doesn't change it. Super high profile killings by police don't change it. The rare court case that actually results in some sort of consequences, which is very low, as we'll get into, doesn't change it. Isn't it shocking how consistent it is? Almost as if it has nothing to do with all of that. It feels like a quota is being met. Obviously, it's not that, but Jordan, it feels like they know that they can get about 3 per day and nothing will happen. That's what it feels like.
That's the thing, John. Nothing will happen. So why would they ever stop? And if you have both parties in Congress clamoring for more funding, more equipment, more resources, it only validates them in everything they're doing. There's no disincentive to rein back what they're doing or rein in the violence, to scale back how aggressive they are, to change the training that encourages a shoot first, ask questions later mentality, to treat everyone they encounter as a potentially violent adversary. This is a system designed to perpetuate this problem. So until we completely change how we do policing in this country and defund, and by that I mean, reallocate resources into other community investments so that every situation in a city isn't responded to first by a guy with a gun.
Yep.
It's a more holistic approach to the complexities of human behavior. They are typically aggressors in situations. They aggravate already delicate circumstances. And when there's no consequence for brutality or killing, why would they stop?
Yeah, the only consequence, honestly, like, am I being unfair to say that the only consequence nearly 2 years after all those protests, in terms of like society looking back and having an issue, is how dare they have used the term defund the police? That's the takeaway. They were wrong because they used wording that some people don't like. They were the bad guys, not the murderers, not those doing the brutality, but them. And look, I'm just gonna quickly remind you of some of the stats. Black individuals 3 times more likely to be killed by police than white people. People of all sorts killed in America by police, but far more likely for black people. Also, 1.3 times more likely to be unarmed than white people when they're killed by the police. Again, police kill unarmed people of all races, but more likely for black people. And the most important stat, 98.3% of killings by police over almost a decade-long period did not result in the officers even being charged with a crime. You see that little 1 in the corner, the blue? That's the conviction. The 1 conviction out of 100 killings that we actually get. We can't even change that number after all of this. Anyway, absolutely absurd. And the Democrats aren't gonna do anything. Maybe we can get them to pose in some more costumes, but that's probably about it. Maybe they can name a street or something. That's about it, actually.
That's another thing, though. You had all these cities their mayors paint Black Lives Matter on the street. It was total performative allyship, and then turned around and increased police budgets. No 100%. Punishments, no reforms, no institutional reforms, no realignment on how we address police unions, which that structure alone is a big problem to obtaining justice.
Yeah.
Now we painted Black Lives Matter on the street. We're good here. Just totally performative.
That's all it is. It was clear at the time, at the very least.
He says 13.5% of teen girls say Instagram makes thoughts of suicide worse. 17% of teen girls say Instagram makes eating disorders worse.
And what's super tragic is Facebook's own research says, as these young women begin to consume this eating disorder content, they get more and more depressed, and it actually makes them use the app more. Facebook's own research says it is not just that Instagram is dangerous for teenagers, that it harms teenagers. It's that it is distinctly worse than other forms of social media.
So that is Frances Hogan, who last year was the Facebook whistleblower who let us know that Facebook knows not only that their technology has a negative impact, especially on young people, especially young girls, but that is uniquely bad in comparison to the rest of the landscape, which is terrible. And now finally we find out, due to some great work over at the Washington Post by Taylor Lorenz and Drew Harwell, that Facebook is finally responding, but not to that. They're responding to the fact that TikTok's becoming too popular. And so they are pretending that TikTok is the platform with the problem, ignoring all of their own research. What they're doing is they're teaming up with a Republican consulting firm called Targeted Victory to try to take down TikTok by creating an astroturfed like atmosphere of concern. So they place op-eds and letters to the editor in major regional news outlets. They promote dubious stories about alleged TikTok trends that don't actually exist. And then in fact, it started on Facebook. They pushed to draw political reporters and local politicians into helping take down its biggest competitor. So they've got this group that is attacking TikTok now. And so Jordan, I thought that you would find this to be fascinating with all of the problems that we know that Facebook has, that they are ignoring all of that. They're not doing anything to fix the issues with pushing for radicalization, white supremacy, and all that on that platform. They're trying to stop the kids from going over to TikTok.
Yeah, this is, just such an evil corporation. And remember, when she came forward and started talking about this, Facebook's response was to immediately announce, we're rebranding. We're now known as Meta, and we're gonna go into the metaverse. And all of these, credulous reporters like, ooh, wow, cool, what's that? Never mind, that's not really a new technology and it's going to suck. It was just a total diversion tactic and it worked. And people stopped talking about what she was saying. It was hugely successful. So now they want to smear TikTok, not because they have any concern for how social media affects kids, because if they did, they wouldn't let kids on their platform or change the way their algorithm works. It's that they just don't want another competitor in their space because they're ultimately driven by a profit motive. Exactly. It's really, really heartbreaking to think about how people's images of themselves and images of the world around them are distorted by these types of platforms, because those algorithms continue to feed into people's worst behavior patterns, their worst consumption patterns. And if they see that somebody's looking at, self-destructive or harmful content and it keeps them on the platform, they'll do it.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't care about the damage. The only thing they care about is the damage to their stock price, potentially, their market capitalization. But anyway, if you want to find out more about this, go to the Washington Post, Taylor Lorenz, Drew Harwell, some great reporting there. Some amazing quotes from Meta staffers and Targeted Victory trying to pressure news outlets to gin up controversies over TikTok. Jordan, do you like cheese?
Depends on the cheese.
What do you like?
Goat cheese is good. I like, it depends. I don't know. Pepper jack.
Okay, thank you God for the pepper jack. When someone asks you what cheese you like, and the only one you can think of is goat cheese, I don't think
goat
you
cheese
like
rocks.
Cheese.
No. Yeah, some of it.
Like goat cheese.
It's just the idea that it's the viscosity of milk. It's the you know what it was? I think I've told this before on another show. When I was a kid, a friend of mine had left a glass of milk in his room for a couple days, and it was hard, and he put his finger in it. And I just so repulsed by it. I must have been 5 or 6. And I still remember that like vividly. And I just never wanted milk ever again. I haven't had a glass of milk since then.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.